Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, we're back on the Investigative Journal, and glad you're back on this Tuesday, August 8th, 2017 day on our calendar. And today I'm going to play back an old interview I did with C.T. Wilcox regarding the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Because I was thinking just earlier today how when I was in school, and I mentioned this in the show I did almost, 11 years ago, how really, I listened to all that nonsense history, and we never got the truth, but we believe it hook, line, and sinker. So it takes a long time to reprogram your brain. So if you want to reprogram your brain, go to my website at arcticbeacon.com. That'll take you to this site called Greg Anthony's Journal. And you can press that donate button to keep the show on the air. We're trying to raise some money this month as we're listener supported. And the advertisers, they run from the hills over this stuff. Now, I remember when I owned a small little newspaper in Eagle, Idaho. It was a small town. The town was drying up, and I even wrote a small article about it. It had to do with a horse race. And you can go to my website and get that. Maybe I'll read it in the second half hour. It's a very short article. But I remember the drugstore owner, who was kind of the big, advertiser. It was like $1,000 ad. He pulled it because he didn't like my politics. I wrote some story criticizing how they treat the poor people in town, and the fire department doesn't seem to get there as quick as they do if it's a rich guy's house. And they all lived on the other side of the tracks, so it made for a good story. Oh, but he got angry. And in fact, that was the beginning of the end. I'd go in to get some ads, and they would go, we were just running tight on money now. So basically, the writing was on the wall, plus the internet was coming in. The town was drying up anyway. So that was my stint as a publisher of a small town newspaper. But anyway, I thought about that history lessons that I used to get in high school and college. And I've said many times, why don't we just ask for all our money back from these universities who take it from us, or then we got to pay back student loans or something. And what are we getting? We're getting revisionist history. And that's why you got to go to my website, because I promise I'll deprogram you. And I'm doing it cheaply. Imagine what you'd have to pay for a deprogrammer. Man. And I can't even get a lot of donations. It's like pulling teeth. Anyway, that's enough, Greg. Enough of, crying in your beer, so to speak. But it's true. It really is. Well, let me see this. Just thinking about that story, that advertiser in that town, that publisher. I mean, I was the publisher. He was the drugstore owner. And everybody buys drugs, so he was probably the richest guy in the world there. Okay. So let me read the story I wrote about that situation, but I talk about it in a little different term. And I was thinking about this the other day. People know me for, talking about the Vatican and Jesuit order. And in a sense, I've been typecast. I have a lot of other interests. And I've been that way my entire life. It's probably been my downfall. As a journalist, I'm used to talk to the paupers and to the kings and all these people. My problem is I always wanted to do it, not only write about it. So I tried a whole hell of a lot of things. And my Uncle Chester once said, Greg, the only way you're going to get ahead is if you stay in one place. Boy, that was like trying to tell a rabbit to sit still for an hour. But anyway, let me read you the story. It's called The Big Race and Looking for Peter. It's 3:30 in the morning, and I do not want to wake up, but I have no choice. Looking for Peter is waiting. She's a beautiful 3-year-old filly, and I've been galloping her for months, getting ready for the first big race. We are at a small track in Boise, Idaho. I own a small-town newspaper not far away. The paper's just about bust now. The town is drying up, little advertising money, and, well, everybody's looking at the new internet. In fact, the big drugstore owner in town doesn't like my politics and is pulling his $1,000 full-page ad, which will do me in. So I took a few hard-earned bucks and purchased 2 racehorses, El Raza and Peter. Raza was tough. Once almost bit off my ear, and looking for Peter was born to run. I got lucky. To horse people, fillies and mares can be a bit unpredictable. One day a friend, the next day, watch out, you may get kicked. Raza was the typical female with her moods. But Peter, more like a stallion. You know what you're getting every day. The pair cost me about $5,500, and I figured if the newspaper's going under, I might as well try something else. My ex tried to get them, but she already had taken enough from me, so her lawyer probably said, let him have the horses. However, this story is not about divorce. It is about a big race coming up. And when I get tired of sitting behind a typewriter, I'd always be on a horse, and I trained my fair share over the years. Now, I guess, getting old, I'll ride the pony horses, and that's racetrack lingo for the horses who accompany the racehorses to the starting gate. But I digress. Back to the story. So I'm in the barn now at 4:30. And this time of morning is very, very nice. All the assholes of the world are still sleeping. Nice morning, like I said, and wanted to blow Peter out. That's horse lingo. See what she's got 4 days before her first race. Didn't want anybody to see what she could do. That's why I got up so early. The race we are headed for was a maiden race for non-winners coming up Saturday. And the purse was small, but you make your money betting at these small tracks. And I will remember that gallop till the day I die. She was in step with the rising sun, the wind, and the setting moon. I was along for the ride, and what a ride. I remember saying, what a girl. Long strides, good balance. Probably better than dancing with Marilyn Monroe. But race day, Peter came in second. Lost by a nose, coming on so strong, and another furlong, and she would have won going away. It was a short race, 5.5 furlongs. And I am so glad she didn't win, because 2 weeks later, she was in a 7.5 furlong race, going off at 22-1. And she won by 25 lengths. Peter crossed the finish line, and the others were just rounding the clubhouse turn. I put, as did the jockey, a substantial sum at that betting window and had a nice weekend. Peter went on to win her next, 6 or 7 races at low odds, but bought me a 5-acre place in Eagle, Idaho. Maybe time to look for another winner. And a little editor's note. I have many, many more horse stories to come, some not so good, some real bad, but some that you need to hear, including how I met and was friends with the original jockey of Secretariat, Ronnie Rowland, who lost his job to Ronnie Turcotte for loving the bottle more than the horse. And I remember Ronnie, and I'll just give you a little tidbit of the story, and I'll write it in the next couple of weeks. But Ronnie was dying. I think he had liver cancer or something. And I'd met him at an old Pomona track at the small, they used to call it the horseshoe track over there in Pomona. It's real tight turns. And I was there looking at some horse, and a friend of mine asked me to do some exercise riding for him, so I'd go there on Saturdays and ride a few. And I met Ronnie, and we became friends. And so as the months went along, he asked me, he said, listen, I'm dying. I don't even have any money. I don't have a car. Would you take me to South Carolina? I said, why? And he said, I want to go back to where I trained Secretariat, the farm. So I said, okay, Ronnie, let's go. So I got in my car and took Ronnie Rowland back to South Carolina. And that's just the beginning of the story. So stay tuned. So you see, I don't typecast me. I like doing a lot of different things. And, as they say in show business, if one show's not working, try another one. And so you may see me writing about a bunch of different things. And I'm not about to just sit here and talk to the wall. Why people say to me, well, Greg, you know something? Without you, I don't think I'd ever learn this stuff. Well, I'm happy for that. But there comes a time and a place when even I have to feel like that I'm worthwhile. And occasionally when you do these things and you realize that people aren't really putting their money where their mouth is, it starts to affect you. So I'm not going to let it do that. So anyway, that's just me. And say what you will. Say I'm greedy. Say I'm selfish. Say whatever you want. I've heard it all. But anyway, here, the main thing today is I want to get away from that revisionist history. And I remember talking to C.T. Wilcox. He wrote a definitive book, and he's a Canadian. We're all American writers. And he wrote a book about the truth behind the assassination of Lincoln. Now, there's a book by Burt McCarty that was written in, I believe, in 1920s. And she was a woman. She wrote as a man. And she wrote a great story about the truth behind the assassination of Lincoln. Get that one, too. But anyway, here's my interview with C.T. Wilcox back in 2006 on the Investigative Journal.
As a kid, I used to sit in school, and you read these history books. I remember this, like they're the Bible. I mean, you believe every word of it. And then you have this imposing teacher standing over you, giving you an exam, and you got to remember everything as they tell you. One of the most disheartening things in my life was when I realized that a lot of that stuff I was reading was not true. And it begins to eat at you. It begins to make you wonder if they can lie about the things in your history books when you're a kid, what else are they lying about and hiding? And as a journalist, boy, that really sparks you for a lifetime of questions, and it never really ends. I mean, what I'm really looking forward to this, and I know you will be for the next hour and a half. I have C.T. Wilcox on. He's a researcher, a writer, an actor. He lives in Calgary, Canada, and he's done a wealth of research on this book. It's called The Transformation of the Republic, The Origins of Religious Hijacking of the American Government and the Truth Behind the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln. This book, let me tell you something. It's not his opinions at all. This is based on fact, especially the part about Lincoln that has been hidden from our history books. You know what they've done in the history books about the American Indians, how they've skewed that story, and many, many other things about our American history, the true version of it. Well, this is a chapter that you're going to want to listen to because it was left out of your history book when you were a kid. Transformation, the book that C.T. Wilcox, my guest, wrote, is basically a 375-page expose of Vatican and Jesuit intrigues and interference into the political structure of the United States and Europe. It contains shocking revelations and fully authenticated documentation, much of it hidden for almost 100 years, to support the conclusion that the United States has been transformed from a beacon of light and hope into an empire with beast-like tendencies, and that the world is headed for a Vatican-led and instigated cataclysm while the population sleepwalks towards the edge of extinction. There are so many questions in this book. And CT, how are you today?
Not too bad, Greg. How are you?
Oh, I have so many. We got a few minutes before this break and then a whole hour and a half to deal with what you uncovered, and I find it fascinating. Questions like who really murdered Abraham Lincoln and several other presidents? Did John Wilkes Booth act alone, or was he simply on a crew of specially hired hitmen who were chosen to further the aims of wicked men and desperate politicians dressed in religious costumes? You go on to many, many other things, but I guess, is that a place you want to start? With what you uncovered about Lincoln?
Where should I start? Well, first, I'd like to get a couple of things out of the way first.
Go right ahead.
Some people have said, well, do you consider this like Catholic bashing or something? And I said, well, not really. to give you an example. In our schools, anyway, in grade like 6, 7, 8, 9, we're taught extensively about the Crusades and the Inquisition, conquistadors coming over from Spain and Portugal, planting crosses as well as their national standards on the beaches, and then running around and raping and pillaging the Aztec and Mayan cultures and all this stuff, all in the name of God and in the name of the emperor that they happen to, come across with, right?
Right.
And so in our schools we get into all of that, and then we get into how the church and the state combine their efforts to set up residential schools and basically destroy the Native American culture, and then more recently in Newfoundland, anyway, well, actually about 20 years ago, there was a really, really big stink about how priests of the church had set up this orphanage called Mount Cashel, and proceeded over the space of years to sexually assault 8 and 9-year-old boys, right? And then trying to keep it quiet by paying off the politicians, right? So anyway, in our classes, we had Catholic students, sitting right across, right beside you almost, and not once did we ever turn to our, fellow student and say, well, because you're Catholic, therefore you're to blame or something like this, right? Not once did it ever cross our minds, because it's history.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, you can't dispute that, right? And just, just because, the Vatican played a very, very extensive role in all of this stuff doesn't mean that the individual rank and file parishioners really have anything to do with it. They're just being used as pawns. Every one of us as kids realized that. So that would be my answer to, am I, bashing Catholics?
Yeah, and one other thing, you bring up the major question. Our history has been hijacked, and when you start doing that, basically there's a bigger reason behind that. We want to get into those things, and also into many of the things you bring up in this 375-page book that you worked on for over 15 years. We'll be back 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
Broken string, broken thread, broken spring, broken bottles, broken head, people sleeping in broken beds. Ain't no use jiving, ain't no use joking, everything's broken.
All right, C.T. Wilcox is my guest. He wrote a book called Transformation of the Republic. And C.T., let's get back to what we were talking about. This thing that's so disgusting, really is disheartening when we find out much of history has been either edited or just left out or changed to suit the people that basically are controlling the educational systems in United States and I dare say Canada too. Can you just comment on that?
Yeah, well, okay. There's a big difference between what they're taught down in the U.S. than what we're taught in our schools here. And I ran into, a little bit of personal history here. Half my family are U.S. citizens.
Okay.
This goes all the way back to the War of Independence. When that happened, half the family became United Empire loyalists and came north. The rest of the family stayed down there. Okay. Now I had several years ago, I had cousins that came up from Ohio to visit, and we had a cottage about 150 miles north of Toronto, and we took them up there, and they honestly, the extent of their geography, and these guys were like, a few years older than I was, and they honestly thought that they were on the same parallel as Greenland.
Okay.
And you got to be kidding. So that was kind of my introduction to the extent of, basic geography. And so we started getting into other things, history and whatnot. We started talking about the War of 1812, and here we're taught that the War of 1812 was, for all intents and purposes, a war of expansion on the part of the U.S. And they got as far as just a little bit around the Niagara Peninsula and got turned back big time. And they're not taught that at all. And they're taught something completely different. And started me on a little quest of the differences between the educated, what you're taught there, and what we're taught here. And when I started looking into the Lincoln assassination, it's like all you ever hear is Booth, 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 right? And I ran into that working on the set of Open Range, that's Kevin Costner's Western that was shot here. And one of the close friends of Mr. Costner, we would sit down and we would discuss what I was researching and what has turned into this book. And his whole focus was on Booth. And I said, well, wait a minute. Booth wasn't the only guy. There were at least a half a dozen other people involved in that. And then I found out that there was a huge influence from priests, and it was so, yeah, we had pretty intense discussions over that, right? And so it's basically what I wanted to do was set the record straight, basically, get as much documentation as I could, and I went to the National Archives in Washington, I went to the Library of Congress, I got documents from the archives of the Austrian government, and then private collections and other things, and pieced it all together. It took quite a long time, and I said, this is my gift to the American people. Okay, I'm giving you your history back, because apparently it's been altered to such a degree that if you don't understand your history about what took place then how on earth do you expect to understand what's happening now?
Yeah, and good. Just a little aside here, and then we're going to get into what your thesis is and what you found out. Yesterday on my show, I had a gentleman by the name of Brother Thomas, and he mentioned he has a law degree. He's now painting houses, and just a really good guy to talk to, and well informed. He said in 1988 he uncovered a communist cell in our country that was actually in charge of manipulating the library boards to make sure certain books were taken out. And so it just goes to show you what kind of level we've reached in this country regarding how not only our history is edited, but how basically freedom of speech is a thing of the past. So go ahead. I'm really interested. What did you find out about John Wilkes Booth and the Abraham Lincoln assassination? If we can't get at Kennedy, let's go back and start with Lincoln and work our way up from there. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, what I found out was essentially the Booth and Surratt and Atzerodt and Payne and all those guys were hired specifically for the purpose of getting rid of the U.S. government at a point in time where they thought that they could reinstate the Civil War and eventually get what the South wanted, which was essentially, you hear about states' rights and the slave issue, right? Well, that was only part of it. There was a bigger question in play, and that was that the Vatican apparently wanted to place a papal crown on the head of Jefferson Davis. They wanted to establish the principles of monarchy. They wanted to reestablish the principles of monarchy that the United States had just gotten rid of through Britain, right? And because the papacy had backed several of these monarchs in Europe, except for the Crown of England. That was kind of a back and forth thing, right? The United States decided to embark on an experiment called representative congressional system of government.
Okay, we're going to have to take a break, but I'm going to come right back in 3 minutes. Here we're in 2017 now. Keep track. And we'll come right back, and I promise we'll pick up right where we left off. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn, the Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This ain't happening.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal, and I promised, and I will keep my promise to you, I'm going to get back to my interview that I did in 2006 with C.T. Wilcox to set the record straight about the Abraham Lincoln assassination.
And the monarchs of Europe and the Vatican saw that as a very big threat to their own existence. They thought, well, if that concept, if that idea ever catches on in Europe, then we're sunk. Mm-hmm. You know, all of everything that we worked so hard for over the centuries is like really down the chute, and kind of turned out to be the case insofar as a lot of these crowns eventually disappeared. So I started, digging back even further. I would ask my cousins, well, you've heard of the Monroe Doctrine, right? But do you know what it was all about? What caused President Monroe to come out with that, right? And that's where you get into the machinations of what was
us about that. What did you find out?
The Holy Alliance was a joint venture between Austria, Prussia, which is Germany, Russia, and France, and the Vatican, to maintain the monarchic principles in Europe, to destroy anything that did not agree with them, and to make sure that the experiment now happening in the United States would never blossom. So they got together and they worked out this little plan, and documented it in a treaty called the Treaty of Verona, which was a ratification of an earlier document from the Congress of Vienna. And what they want, and they placed this blueprint into the hands of the Jesuits for them to turn around and try to implement this. Now, at the same time,
who placed what into their hands?
The monarchies of Europe and the Vatican said to the Jesuits, okay, here's what we want to do. Now, what we want you to do is implement all of this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And how they went about that was to try to flood the United States with adherents to their their first allegiance of a Catholic, so far as the Church is concerned anyway, is to the Vatican. They are citizens of Rome first and citizens of their country second. And so their ultimate allegiance has to be to their church. And if it's not, then they are, they try to bring them back into line and that, and do that. So anyway, what happened was they bring in all these people, tens and tens of thousands of adherents from all over Europe and Ireland and whatnot. And their reasoning was, if we can get these people to become full-blown citizens, then we can turn around and divorce their allegiance from the country and place it into the hands of their priests and that.
Sounds like something going on today. With the
and basically use the principles of democracy against it by overwhelming the vote, putting in their own people who can then turn around and alter the Constitution, alter the Bill of Rights, and bit by bit reestablish some sort of monarchical principle in North America.
Yeah, and just recently in Newsweek we talked about this. There was a statement made by some of these promoters of the illegal immigration rallies that these rallies would not have been successful, and they were actually promoted by the Catholic Church in Los Angeles, by the Archdiocese, and these would have never come about without their help.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
I have a copy of the April 10th issue of Newsweek in my hand right here, and it says that Catholic leaders have urged the faithful to defy the House immigration bill. Roger Mahoney, who has 500,000 people in his diocese, was in Rome when CNN was broadcasting the first street marches and that. And let's say here, he was beside himself. Just thoroughly thrilled that this was happening, and he got papal blessing for it all. And then they have a quote here from Vilma Martinez, 39 years old, East LA resident, who stated that he went to these marches because the cardinal said it was important. No other reason.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, let's get back to what we were talking about. You were back in we're back in history now. The Monroe Doctrine, other things. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. The Monroe Doctrine, basically. Okay. President Monroe sat down with Thomas Jefferson and a few other people, John Quincy Adams, and discussed this threat to the United States. How the monarchs in Europe wanted to transplant their system of government into North and South America. And so that was kind of the basis for the Monroe Doctrine. It was to counteract that, to thwart it. And Samuel Morse, as the guy that invented the telegraph, went over to Europe with the blessings of President Monroe to kind of uncover what was going on there. And what he found was just absolutely astonishing. And in my third chapter in my book, I basically condense all of his salient points into a book that Samuel Morse wrote in 1835 called Foreign Conspiracy Against the Liberties of the United States.
That's Professor Samuel F.B. Morse.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. And what he found then was, it's still in operation now.
Well, tell us. That's interesting.
Well, basically how they're using immigration to accomplish the church's purpose of placing everybody under the submission of the papacy, right? I mean, if they can use the military of the United States to accomplish that goal, then they will. And how did they do that? By placing people in key positions in government that will do their bidding for them, right? And now, so what happens is you've got an organization called the Jesuits, and if you read their oath, I mean, it's a pretty intense little oath there, and I quote the whole thing in full. And they say that they are not above regicide in order to enforce, what they want to do, which is basically the assassination of heads of government. So, for all intents and purposes, any president who does not do what the church wants them to do, they will hire somebody to go out and kill them.
All right, so let's get to Lincoln. Now, the history books say John Wilkes Booth performed the act alone. Now, I know you've got some information that's been suppressed for almost 100 years, and this is first-hand stuff from a family involved in a priest by the name of Father Chiniquy, who was a client of Abraham Lincoln. And boy, this stuff is just amazing, and how you found it is even more amazing. Let's start into it. We have 2 minutes before the break, and then we'll continue on. Go ahead.
Okay, Charles Chiniquy, he was being set up by his church, okay, and after Lincoln's assassination, started to accumulate an awful lot of documentation pointing to the fact that the church had orchestrated this assassination. Much of the material that he had was stored in a little town that he established called St. Anne, Illinois, which is just outside of Chicago. But he was smart enough not to place all of his eggs in one basket, and a lot of other material was stored in Abbotsford, Quebec, where the family had been sitting on it for 120 years. Historians, public, nobody knew that this stuff existed. And the church found out, apparently, that the material in St. Anne was there. So what they did is they burned it down. They burned his house down and got rid of all of that stuff.
And that is fact.
Yeah, that's fact.
Okay.
What they did not know was that there were 10,000 items that were stored in a basement in Quebec. And the lady that had it, she was 80 years old. She's dead now. She was basically very afraid that if the church ever found out that she had this material, that the same thing would happen to her. So a gentleman in Northern Ontario was able to get his hands on it. He worked out some sort of a deal, and he's archived it all. Chiniquy.ca, you can get it from him. And among this material are sworn statements from priests in Minnesota, St. Paul and St. Cloud, Minnesota, who not only knew about Lincoln's assassination at least a week beforehand, but were bragging about it as an accomplished fact. That's how sure they are that their plans were. And they say, yeah, not only did we know about it, but we kind of, hired these guys to actually do it on our behalf.
Interesting. We're going to take a break, come back and talk to you more about Father Chiniquy's statements and also about the people in his family you talked to back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal. Okay, we're back. My guest, C.T. Wilcox, has written a book called Transformation of the Republic, and my guest is going to prove to you, listeners, that beyond a reasonable doubt, after you listen to this evidence that he's presenting to you, that he's compiled, that he's telling us, that he's giving as a gift to the American people because the history of our country has been hijacked, I know you're going to find that his story is compelling, is true, and is something that all of us need to look at. How did Abraham Lincoln die? C.T. Wilcox is going to tell you. We're talking right now about Father Chiniquy, who had evidence showing that Wilkes was hired by the church, hired by the Jesuit order, and we're going to get into what Mr. C.T. Wilcox found to lead him to this conclusion. So go ahead and tell us where you left off with Chiniquy.
Okay. So those are the sworn statements from these particular priests in Minnesota. And these were like with this little seal on them and everything. So they're kind of unimpeachable, right? And then I found among the rest of this archive that's out there are private letters from Edwin Sherman, who was a Union officer during the war. And he wrote a book eventually called The Engineer Corps of Hell, subtitled Rome's Sappers and Miners. And in the private correspondence to Charles Chiniquy, he discussed many, many things, but he leaves no doubt as to the fact that the church was completely behind that assassination. They go into why, because they wanted to completely turn the concept of the congressional system of government upside down and reestablish a monarchy. And a monarchy
kind of like what's happening today.
Yeah. Well, really, I mean, when you take a look at the number of executive orders that have come down since the administration of Ronald Reagan, who, by the way, after Lincoln's assassination in 1867, the United States had severed all ties, diplomatic ties with the Vatican as a direct result of their involvement in not only helping to engineer the Civil War, but also the assassinations that they were involved in.
That's fact.
And that's fact. And I have a newspaper article in one of the graphics pages that discusses, that fact. Ronald Reagan was the first president since 1867 to reestablish diplomatic ties with the Vatican. And ever since then, there have been all these executive orders coming down, which amount basically to a return to the monarchic principles that caused the War of Independence to begin with.
Exactly. And what I wanted to mention, this hidden documentation has been hidden for almost 100 years, and it's amazing how he uncovered it. They thought it was all destroyed in this fire, right?
Yeah, apparently, but they had no idea that the family had been sitting on the rest of this stuff.
In Quebec.
And yeah.
Listen, let's get to that and how you talk. I believe, did you talk to one of the family members?
Yeah, her name was Laura LaFave, and she was in her mid-80s. She was very sick by the time I was able to talk to her. But yeah, she told me how for most of her life she was kind of very afraid.
All right, we're gonna come back with that right after this short break on the Investigative Journal. My guest, C.T. Wilcox. What a fascinating book, Transformation of the Republic. Where can you get that, just so people that are listening know how to get to your website and your book? Tell us.
Okay. Well, my website is ctwilcox.com, and presently it's the only place you can get it. The price is $29.95 US, and then there's a $10 shipping charge on top of that. You can there's a link there for PayPal, so it can be purchased that way. And as soon as I get the email saying that the funds are there, then it goes out within an hour. And I do have my P.O. Box address on the website, and you can either send an international money order. Now, I had money orders sent to me before that stay negotiable only in the United States. And that's no good here. So it has to read international postal money order.
Well, at least it's
a certified check.
Well, wait till we get the euro here or whatever. We'll all be on the same money soon. So but at least now it's no good. But anyway, shortly, the people behind this whole thing are going to change our money system. So that will clear that issue up. And we're going to get into. We only have 2 minutes before this break, so I don't want to start this about the Chiniquy evidence that you have. This is really compelling stuff, and but it just upsets me. When I was a kid, looking back now, I'm thinking about myself sitting in history class when I was a kid, and being actually taught fiction in so many different areas when I thought it was fact. And now, when you start really piecing back your history, I'm having to go back to school all over again.
I'm going to cut it off right there, and I'm going to push it forward and get right to C.T. Wilcox.
Well, here we go. We got to get into this, the nuts and bolts of this very interesting information that you uncovered from Quebec. You talked with one of the family members, a former Father Chiniquy, who had inside information. Abraham Lincoln represented him as a Catholic priest. Basically uncovered a lot of things about the Jesuits. Chiniquy at one time reminded Abe Lincoln, "You may win the election, but you'll never beat the Jesuits," and that is a statement that's been recorded. Tell us how what you found out in Quebec.
Well, like I said, in the documents that they have that this family had were, like I said, the sworn statements from the priests in Minnesota, who were in constant communication with their fellow priests in Washington, right? So they had arranged all of this way beforehand, and they put the hit squad together. One of them by the name of John Surratt, and I find this really, really funny.
Okay, so Wilkes Booth was in the hit squad. You got John Surratt was also. Who's he now?
John Harrison Surratt was a 19-year-old kid who went to, he was being educated as a priest. He came from a dysfunctional family. His mother had switched from whatever religion she was to the Catholic religion and became rather fanatical. Apparently had written several love letters to one of her priests.
Okay.
So what the priest did was kind of cultivate this young kid and bend his mind to do what they wanted to do. And during the Lincoln assassination, John Surratt was outside Ford's Theater calling the time. Basically, it was a method of pretty crude code telling Booth inside the theater that, okay, it's almost time to get this done, right? Mm-hmm. There's a book out now called Manhunt that's being turned into a film with Harrison Ford in that, and I have to really laugh, because you want to talk about a manhunt, you go after Surratt. Now,
what's Manhunt going to be about?
Apparently about how the 12 days that they were going after John Booth.
Okay.
Right, and which kind of, reminds me of the conversation I had with this friend of Kevin Costner, right, on the set of Open Range. Because all he kept talking about was Booth. That's no. But there were much more. There were like a half a dozen guys involved in this thing, right? Payne went after Secretary of State Seward, stabbed him numerous times, and left him for dead. Bashed the skull in of one of Seward's children. And so that was, Seward almost died in that attack, the very same, an hour or two before Booth got into Ford's Theater. Now anyway, Surratt, his case is really interesting. He went from Washington and skipped north to Montreal. Now the Confederate kitchen cabinet was based in Montreal, right? So there were a lot of Confederate spies and whatnot going to and fro from not just Montreal, but also to southern Ontario, Hamilton, Toronto, and whatnot, right? So there was all this traffic the direction of their bishop. And they kept their head out. And the United States government was like all over the place looking for this little creep, right? Mm-hmm. And they couldn't find him. I mean, who's going to think about searching priests' houses 60 miles outside of Montreal, right? So this is what they did. And then from there, they put him on a boat to Liverpool and gave him some money and disguised him, whatnot. And so he got to Liverpool, and he was hidden there, which was basically the place that he stayed was a way station or a clearinghouse for all the priests coming from Europe to North America, carrying dispatches and orders from Rome. So anyway, he's there. And then from there, he goes to Rome and becomes a member of the Vatican Guard.
Surratt?
Yeah.
Huh.
And
now this stuff was never in the history books. I know that. I never remember even the name Surratt.
Yeah, which is really shocks me. I can't understand. Anyway, so yeah, Surratt, he becomes a member of the Vatican Guard. Now the United States didn't have an extradition treaty with the Vatican at that time, and the Vatican knows. They're looking for this guy high and low. He went to Rome under the name of John Watson, and so he's kindly, he's taken under the wing of the Pope and is, basically protecting the papacy. And so the United States is looking all over for him, and so what the church does is they're going to try to preempt any. Like when the crap hits the fan kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. We're going to try to maybe preempt anything that might happen. So we're going to say, okay, United States, we're going to give this guy up to you, right?
Okay, we got to break it off. So come back tomorrow, and you can find out what happens with John Surratt. Back on the Investigative Journal, I'll play the remainder of this interview I did in 2006. Have a good evening, and I will see you tomorrow.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.